What's up, everybody? Today we've got David Long with us. He's most notable probably as an integral philosopher. So that's Ken Wilber's work, right? David, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I was a teacher of integral philosophy for about a decade, pretty well known in those groups and in that circle. For a while, I tried to sort of make integral more healthy and clean up some of its problems and fix some of the ways that I think that it goes wrong and the ways that Wilber's bias preference for Eastern religion kind of corrupts his whole model and his whole project. So I started Integral 2.0, and we can talk more about like the differences between what I'm trying to do now and what these other meta theories are doing. But so after a while, I gave up on the project of trying to make Integral more healthy. And by the time this has come out, I will have already launched my new version of meta theory called Non-Reductionism, which has upgrades to all the elements and a new element, and also tries to fix some of the problems that I've noticed in the meta theory communities, that are like community problems and leadership problems, and also to try to make it more active in the world and like more practical, not just so heady with a bunch of talking heads always talking about theories and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's some the reason why I was really attracted to your work initially, I discovered you on Facebook through the internal community, is because I also had this frustration with Wilber of his biased symbol sets with Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta and the kind of assumptions that creates with his meta theory of these stages that basically reflect those assumptions. And yeah, your integral revolutionary movement, the revolution of, it was like this passionate sense of this community coming together and being like, yeah, we're not just going to, philosophize about this stuff. We're actually going to do something with it, and we're going to, help make the world a better place. And yeah, being discerning. And I really liked your caveat that you used to use as, it has to be at least rational. Like trans-rational is at least rational, and the kind of habit maybe of the community, or maybe just inherent in its framing in some sense, is that it can allow for these, what some might say are a kind of a pre-trans fallacy. In some sense, it's the letting in of these symbol sets and these assumed meanings that aren't really rational, at least to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Definitely a fair assessment. I would say it's baked in, because of the way that Wilber even draws his quadrants, is that consciousness goes all the way down and back. I don't think I recognized it really immediately. Like, I already kind of had a version of quadrants in my worldview. It was called divisions of 4, and it was more of kind of a loose tool that you could apply to anything. Similar to how the quadrants are, although the quadrants are like divisions of 4 applied to ontology. Like, they are talking about aspects of reality in particular, like interiors and exteriors, individuals and collectives. But other people in the past, Jung, for example, he used divisions of 4 not in this ontological kind of way. Lots of people have used it. I would say it even goes back to like yin and yang, right? Like if you take a yin yang and you flip it so that way the dots are on one side and the other things on the other side, you basically have, the quadrants. You have the individuals and the wholes, and the inside and outside. So this is like a super old tool. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, in Wilber's version of it, when he applies it to ontology, he does these sort of lines going out and correlates what's happening in all the ontological quadrants going all the way down and back. And his view, he tells the classic Eastern mythology creation myth as if it's true. He believes in that kind of worldview. And that's also, part of why I call my meta theory non-reductionism. Of course, there's good things from Buddhism and Eastern traditions that we would want to include. Like, I'm not against state training or anything like that, but we don't want to favor one particular tradition at the expense of others. And I do also think that there are better ways to take a more holistic perspective in relation to every single quadrant. For example, his version of epistemology is integral methodological pluralism, which takes an inside and outside to each one of the quadrants. My version of epistemology is called 4P4Z, which is 4 prime epistemic methodologies in all 4 ontological zones. So it's quadrants within quadrants. And we do quadrants within every quadrant. So, like, for example, he also talks about the 3 S's of spiritual practice, which he considers to be like a holistic understanding of spiritual practice. But he's also kind of, all of his 4 S's are still kind of all upper left practices. He talks about states, stages, and shadow. So states is upper left. Stages is very vague. He doesn't really unpack what that is. I guess for him, that's also just studying and learning. And then shadow is, again, like an internal upper left practice. It's not like, for example, like if we were really going to do like a lower left practice, that might be something like related to relationships, like something like loyalty, or like maybe even like acts of service, like getting involved in your community and doing something of value to like bring value to the community, not just like I react to things in the world and I process my own shadow. That's not really a lower left practice. Also, when it comes to morality, like the in the lower left, all he really talks about is depth and span utilitarianism, which is also like kind of like a lower right within the lower left. But I think it's important to include moralities from all 4 quadrants. So that would be something like consequentialism, utilitarianism, deontology, and Aristotelian virtue ethics, for example. If you just do in depth and span utilitarianism, well, that's good for some projects as it relates to the lower right, but it doesn't get at those like upper left, like virtue ethics that are personal. And, this is the issue in all quadrants, is that it's kind of like the Wilberian model is a sort of simplistic and biased, early version of meta theory. So, I mean, like, I stand on the shoulders of giants when I refine it and make it better. Like the groundwork has been laid, and I learned a lot from Wilber. I learned a lot from Wilber. I learned a lot about how to have a meta theory, but also like if you just apply his own rules and his own ideas and stuff like that, it's pretty clear that it needs to be better. There's room for improvement, and I think one of the other things that I realized too, like very early on, is there's a problem with not being able to recognize primacy as it relates to the quadrants. Like you could say, oh, I'm going to take into account information from all of these quadrants, but how do you know which quadrant is the most important? Or like, what data from what quadrant should we value the most? There was this idea presented by Wilber that we should look in the correct quadrant for data. So if I'm looking to try to find out like something about subjectivity, well, the main quadrant that we need to take into account is the upper left. And I think, was it you, Alexander, who came up with this idea of cross-quadrant validation or tetra-validation?
It's definitely something I've been interested in for a while. I don't know if I was the originator of the idea, but yeah, the cross-quadrant validation. Yeah, we're kind of checking in each quadrant to see if the information you're getting is accurate and relevant and stands up to, our criteria of truth in some sense, which is, I guess, a holistic epistemological endeavor in some sense.
Yeah. So that ability to check, but through kind of opening up the idea that like, hey, we can refine this map together. And I invited other people to give their feedback. Different people offered up different ideas about how we could do the map together. And this guy in our group named Oliver presented this idea, which was kind of like type of nesting of the quadrants. And until then, I kind of, on one of my Davidian integral maps, I sort of had it where like the relationship of the quadrants goes different ways depending on what the question is. So if it's like, if we're doing epistemology, the relationship goes one way. And if we're doing relationship kind of goes the other way. And then like through kind of seeing what he made, I came up with this idea of nested quadratic holarchies, which is about trying to figure out how the quadrants relate to each other in terms of primacy. So, for example, and the reason it relates back to what this guy presented is that he presented this type of nesting that favored a more like emergentist materialist kind of worldview, which, you know, I'm sympathetic to that. But I was like, that doesn't work though if we're doing epistemology, you know, like if we're doing epistemology, the primacy is flipped. So it depends on the project. So like, yeah, if we're doing cosmology, there's a certain way that the quadrants unfold through history. You know, it starts as individual exterior and then like collective exterior, and then eventually interiors emerge as higher levels. But if we're doing epistemology, you know, in kind of the style of Descartes, if we're building from the ground up, we have to start with our own interiors. Like, all I know is like, I think, therefore I am. I know only that I exist, and then I have to figure out the problem of other minds, and then understanding things in a context. So we kind of go the other way, you know? So the thing about Integral is that they have many of the ingredients to a holistic perspective, and they were kind of able to put those on the table, but they don't have the recipe. They don't know how to put these ingredients in the right order to achieve the result. You know, it's like if you have a professional chef and a person who doesn't know how to cook, and you're like, give them the ingredients for a cake. The person who is the baker or whatever, they know how to put the ingredients together in the right order to create the cake. But the lay person, just because they have the ingredients doesn't mean that they know the techniques or the ways to put these ingredients together to achieve the cake, you know? And so that's almost like the meta theory of meta theory, is to not just have the ingredients, but to know how to use them and to like know what the project is that we're trying to do and figure out how to use the ingredients appropriately with the right techniques to achieve the right outcome.
What do you think is required to even know whether we have the correct technique or not? Like, what have you developed something that allows you to kind of check against, like in terms of this meta theories? Yeah, I guess the more abstract we get, the more difficult it becomes to check against other meta theories or meta theories. Like, have you got any clues to that?
I think it comes like it's in the same thing with like baking or whatever, like learning techniques. It comes with practice and experience. You know, if you've tried to talk to people at different levels of the spiral and try to see what works, you start to see what works and what doesn't work. You know, and that's an example of one kind of project. We lost in sync.
I'm going to pause a sec. Are you there?
Sorry, I had to banish a dog.
That's okay. Yeah. So depending on what the project is, we need practice and experience. If you do a bunch of practice of talking to people up and down the spiral, for example, and see what makes them more healthy and what potentially moves them to the next stage or helps them with their growth, we can develop techniques for that, you know? And there's a bunch of different projects. There's a bunch of different life projects, as we all know. And these meta-theoretical tools, knowing what they are, can be helpful to those projects, but we still need to develop the techniques and the tools. And that's why we need, in part, a community, so we can talk to each other about what works for us as it relates to these different projects. And then that's where these new higher level distinctions come online. Like one example, I think, where there's still room for improvement is the Wilber Combs matrix, right? Like Wilber kind of took the stages on the vertical and the states on the horizontal, and he said that we translate the stages or the states from whatever stage we're at. So that's helpful. His focus is largely on states and stuff like that, so it makes sense that that's his focus. And because he believes in reincarnation, and he thinks that the reason that people get up to the highest stages is because they are bringing virtues from their past life with them that helps them move up through stages. I don't think that's true, and I don't really think that's very helpful. One of the reasons why I'm really excited about integral theory and these kind of meta theories and stuff in the first place was because I thought this could be a very helpful way that we as humanity could learn to optimize the growth and human potential and stuff like that. I think that every average thinking human with the right conditioning could get up to the highest stages of development. I don't think that I'm special or I have some kind of past life magic that gives me the ability. I think I just had the right unique life circumstances that allowed for the possibility, you know? And so I think, like I said, if we take into account all of these factors, like states and lines and stages, if we do more experiments and we keep track of more data and we actually work on this project, I think one important project for the future, one kind of important project for the kind of world that we want to make together is figuring out how different types utilize different lines to move through stages. Because we all know that some lines depend on other lines for their growth, but also different types favor different lines. And so we know that we can use strengths from different lines or like different favoritisms towards different quadrants to help improve on what's happening in quadrants or in lines that people have a harder time with. That's what different learning styles and things are like. You can take a person's learning styles or the things that they're good at or the lines that they like, and then help them learn through that line about other lines or through those quadrants about other quadrants. And the better that we get at figuring out what type you are and what lines you favor and what quadrants you favor, the better we're going to be at being able to help people with their growth. So again, this is another way that it's not just knowing about the different factors, but understanding how they relate to each other and how we can work with them in a skillful way to be able to achieve our goals and what we're working.
I really like that, actually. It definitely reminds me of my intentions within my psychotherapy practice, like meeting someone where they're at, understanding their preferences in terms of whether they, not everybody's a good at imagining things. So that's not the best tool to use as like active imagination or whatever. Like maybe they need to feel their body more, or maybe they need to talk more. And like just understanding exactly where someone's at, what their kind of canopy of meaning, how they express and what their preferences are, is the only way to kind of have a holistic approach to their growth and self-realization. I know that as David, you've been a kind of integral coach at different points of your career, if you want to put it that way. Yeah, so that's really cool. That's definitely an interesting project as an educational one. And I know that we're both very passionate about kind of a post-capitalist world where these kind of stage realizations and this integral map in some way can be applied in education and apply especially to new generations growing up. But obviously the educational system is so embedded that it's unlikely to be that is where this education comes from. So I'm curious about this new project of yours and what kind of ambition you have for education and new generations and applying these ideas in some different ways.
Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you mentioned when we talked last that part of what, the new ingredient that you're adding in with this non-reductionism is modes, focus on modes or roles, right? Different roles people fulfill, which is like a, fairly straightforward extension of what you're talking about in terms of sort of different types of people and providing them with the material that they need, depending on what kind of a person they are, to help them to realize their potential. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about like the specifics of that.
Yeah. Well, first I'll respond to what Alexander said, and then I'll say more about the modes. Definitely the reason why I got into a lot of this stuff in the first place was because I want to see a better world. I want to see a better world where we can live together better. And I know that we need better systems, better governance systems, better religious systems, better education systems, more healthy communities. Like and a lot of what Integral works on are hack projects, like a hack into capitalism. Oh, we'll help you have a conscious business. Oh, you could be a conscious consumer. Well, that's not really good enough. We need transformation, not just translation. And so, that part of the reason why I was excited about that community in the beginning was because I thought these were the people who had the tools and the know-how to be able to birth this new world, and that there would be some energy around it. I kind of found out over time that that wasn't the case. Back in the day, they had this Occupy integral around the time the Occupy movement happened. And I got involved with that. And it was kind of the same green style leadership and movement where a bunch of people get together and they talk in circles. And, I would be like, oh, we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. And it was like, very interesting. What do you think? And then we would just go around and go around. And I was like, at a certain point, I was like, so how do we ever decide to do anything? Like, are we going to decide to do anything? Or are we just going to continue to talk in circles? And then it was like, very interesting. Yeah, what do you think? And I was like, okay, I'm going to start my own group where we work on doing things. And it was like called the Integral Community of the Adequate. And I started having those talks. And then what I started to see is this community of the adequate is not adequate. There are still people in this group who believe in these religious creationist ideas. And so this is not it. Like we need to fix this up. And then I came out with the Integral Emergentist Revolutionary Movement. Revolutionary with a small r and a big E, with the emphasis on evolutionary, meaning it's not like a violent revolution, but it's more like a growing up. And the emergentist part was an emphasis on the understanding that consciousness is a later emergent thing and that it doesn't go all the way down and back, and that idealism isn't true. And the importance of making this distinction is if we don't get this right, then, when we try to have an integrative religion later, it's going to be biased. It's going to be biased towards one particular religion and one particular. And so then we sort of rebranded as Integral 2.0. And then later, through kind of continuing to bang my head up against the wall in this community of basically smart sounding New Agers who didn't even really ever learn the theory in the first place. The whole thing was getting very bogged down with drama and like all this tension in the community, and people were telling me like, just start your own thing. So that was kind of the motivation. And so, yeah, we're kind of having to rebuild some of the basic stuff from the ground up again to make sure that we lay the foundation. My heart is really in these kinds of lower level transformation of community, transformation of the system kind of projects. That's really kind of like some of the driving force. But I also feel like I need to kind of be careful not to rush into that stuff. I've seen through like the Zeitgeist movement and some of these other places where they get real excited and they want to talk about it and they get a bunch of energy behind it, but there's nothing for anybody to do. And so it just kind of feels like a lot of frustration without any kind of, ability to take action on it. And they also have this sort of problem of knowing what's wrong with the current system and knowing what kind of system that they want to move to, but there's no real plan to get there. One of the books that I was writing at the time was a handbook for an integral revolutionary movement. I called it The Long View to kind of get my name in the game and to kind of say that it's going to be like a long process to get there and to have like stages of unfolding. And I'll still come out with that book, but it won't be under the title of integral. In fact, I'm kind of trying to distance myself from even really talking about integral anymore because I feel like it's a failed project. And I think that even after I've kind of left the community, it's sort of kind of fizzled and died down because like I was, what we were doing with Integral 2.0 was bringing a lot of drama, and now that that's gone, there's not really much happening. But like you said, Alexander, like I'm very passionate about getting beyond capitalism. I think the greatest wasted resource is human potential. I really want to be able to talk about that kind of stuff more. But like I said, I think it's really important to lay the groundwork. We really have to do a good job of establishing those upper quadrant things in the same way that Integral has done a lot of that work too. Like they get the theory right, they get the personal practice. Well, we have to go through those steps again. So, this brings us back around to modes. I always felt that, part of spiritual practice and part of self-mastery is not just state training, but like the more becoming, not just the being, but the becoming practices. I really like some of the ideas from the more pagan traditions like magic and magic with a K, not, the pre-rational kind of magic, but the kind of focusing your willpower and my dad was kind of a manipulative sort of con man kind of person who I had to get away from in my older youth. But one thing that I learned from him is, and I kind of had to grapple with it, this kind of like the framing of meanings and manipulation versus truth. This is also why I care a lot about epistemic humility and having a good epistemology and being very careful with your speech and stuff like that. I know how susceptible to manipulation we are. And like, I think it's very important that teachers and leaders be really responsible. But I do think that we can use manipulation to achieve things in a way that's good. Let's say like maybe there's a difference between black magic, which would be like selfish, use of manipulation and these kinds of things to achieve things for myself, versus like maybe some kind of like a white magic or like a white wizardry to like to help the greater good or and to improve people's ability to grow. There are ways that we can engage in a skillful way that are manipulative, but with the best intentions in mind, let's say. And this is also where I think that like more conscious people who are living a more conscious life are going to have to kind of grapple with some of this stuff. We shouldn't be acting in an unconscious, authentic, no filters, no methods kind of like way. What we need to do is we need to be skillful and we need to be intentional. We need to have a kind of creative optimism in our actions, and we need to like know what we're doing. And to do things in this kind of intentional and skillful way means that we need a language to be able to talk about what the ingredients are and what the methods are for that. So I think modes and roles is a very helpful way to begin to talk about these kinds of things. So examples of modes could be things like listening mode or study mode or relaxation mode, defensive mode, apologetic mode, skeptical mode, comedic mode, flirtation is a type of mode. Being vulnerable is a type of mode. Being aggressive is a type of mode. Brainstorming mode, psychoanalytical mode, tension processing mode, philosophical mode, planning mode, organization mode. And all of these modes have like a particular type of a methodology to them, or like a particular kind of style and like a steps almost that you go through. They could be other things too, like dominant and submissive, like things that relate to like, let's say, like sexual styles or things like that. Those can be modes too. And so understanding these modes and having what I call mode flexibility to be able to recognize when you're in a mode or be able to switch mode. This is part of conscious living. This is part of like acting skillfully and intentionally, consciously creating your life, instead of just floating through and seeing what's happening. But if you take on particular roles, this is usually when these things become more standardized. There's more like social values related to them, or like communal values related to them, not just like personal values and personal goals like in modes. But it's like roles are like the collective form of modes. And they often, if they're done well, include a type of mode flexibility. There's things like the role of a student or a teacher or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse, a partner, a leader, a coach, a counselor, a producer or director, a host, a guest, a friend, an ally. These are all roles, and they can often include different ones of these modes. Like, for example, if you're a director, you have to like if you're directing films, let's say, you have to go through brainstorming mode and like planning mode. You have to be able to, be good at listening. You have to be flexible in the moment. Like there's so many different modes that you have to be able to be flexible to go into, to be able to pull off this role. And you have certain responsibilities to the people around you when you take on this role. And so those are examples of modes and roles, but they rely on particular skills. And different skills come online as we move through stages of development. Some of the more fundamental or universal skills happen at lower stages of development, like willpower and focus come online more like around the traditional stage of development. Also like an ability to have self-control and self-sacrifice. Like you need these lessons at these different stages to be able to even do these kind of meta skills, which are things like that we're talking about: mode switching, perspective switching, mind mapping, taking into account AQAL, or all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all states, all types, all modes. Like you need to have these more fundamental skills: embodiment, patience, priorities, perspective, willpower, focus, trusting the process, refinement, to be able to get to these higher level meta skills: perspective switching, mode switching, mind mapping, taking into account, AQAL, explicit meta-analysis, contextual adjustment, developmental translation, and simulcasting. You need to have the lower skills to be able to have the higher skills, and certain skills come online at different levels. Some of these highest level skills, like we're talking about developmental translation, these are things that only come online at second tier when you actually have an understanding of stages of development. Like we were talking about earlier, something like taking into account the type and the learning style and the lines that are preferred as people move through stages of development. That's a type of skillful adjustment and translation that can only be done if you have knowledge of these particular factors that are at play and know that they're all in the working. And then something like simulcasting is a super high level turquoise type skill, which is an ability to do like a type of speech that has words in it that will resonate with different levels of development. Like maybe you could say really skilled presidential speeches have something like this. Well, they'll make like appeals to, like the importance of economic values, appeals to family values, like these different words, these different phrases that kind of act like buckshot to be able to resonate with different people in your audience and kind of bring them all towards a message. Sometimes I'm a rapper and I do some of this kind of stuff in my music too, is like I'll use different phrases in relation to each other to kind of say the same thing to different groups at the same time. Like life is just a process. Life is just a process. All is impermanent. All is without a self. Like you can kind of like say something that orange will understand, and then say something that like green plus will understand, like find these kinds of different ways of saying similar things that resonate with different people. You can, and ultimately this is what we're going to need to be able to birth this new kind of world that we're talking about, because what we're not going to be able to do is get everyone up to the highest stages and to agree with those highest values. That's not going to happen. What you can do is you can create that community from the highest stages and the highest values, and then sell it down the spiral. So like, for example, if I want to sell green values, like about like environmentalism or something like that down the spiral, well, obviously you can easily sell green to green. They're on board with that. But like if I want to sell it to orange, I got to appeal to how this is going to save you money. If you build your building in a green way, it's going to save you money over time in the long term. If you appeal to those demographics and those markets, there's money to be made in making your thing green. If you want to sell it to blue, you can be like, God told us to be good stewards of the environment. You got to appeal to the values of the people who you're talking to. If you're talking to red, you can make environmentalism seem rebellious and cool. Like there's ways you can show like, you can frame it like environmental activism and stuff like that, and be like burnt Hummers and, or whatever, like. However, so like when we create this new kind of world that we want to bring about, we got to do the same thing. We got to get people at lower levels of development to want to buy into it because it's good for them, because it resonates with their values. And so, these higher level skills and these things like that are super necessary if we're going to be skillful practitioners in the world. Hope that kind of answers questions.
For anyone who's listening, who's like scratching their head and wondering, what's this green, orange? Can you like explain what those colors represent? And I'm assuming it's an integral thing, right?
Yeah, it's a shorthand for talking about stages of development. It usually goes back to the Graves and Beck model, spiral dynamics. We use that one in particular as kind of a general shorthand because the way that we know about stages is through a meta-analysis of lines. So there's a bunch of developmental psychologists, and they all have done developmental studies as it relates to a particular line. In fact, one of the cool things about the new non-reductionist AQAL map is that it has 16 of the different developmental lines going up through the spiral. And you can see what each one of them are and what each one of them say as it relates to the different stages. No other map has that. So the reason that we use the values line as kind of a shorthand, I think, is because, first of all, it was part of the kind of marketing language of Integral, is that was sort of their main stage theory. But the colors are interesting because they have built into them this idea of a dialectic. So there's warm colors and cool colors. And the warm colors are more individualistic and the cool colors are more communal. So as we develop, the idea is that you're an individual, and then eventually through those values, you form a group, but then that group becomes too small. And so then you kind of go back to being an individual, and then you form, out of those new values evolves a new group. And it's this kind of thesis, antithesis, synthesis kind of dynamic of unfolding. But it goes from basically survival needs to tribal to an impulsive, egoic individualism to a traditional conformist, usually religious kind of perspective, to a more rational achiever, often atheistic or agnostic kind of perspective, which is modern rational achiever, into a postmodern existentialist, sometimes has kind of a new age sort of flavor. A lot of that kind of stuff that we're seeing in the world now coming more online sort of started in the 60s. And then what we're talking about here with meta theory is a postmodern, and then that kind of starts. I also added a new kind of distinction in the non-reductionist map where there's implicit sort of early integration, which is I don't really know the maps or the theories or meta theory, but I'm kind of already intuiting some integrative distinctions. There's truth in all perspectives, but some perspectives are more true than others, right? Maybe you don't have the map yet, but you're already starting to figure some of this stuff out. I think Joseph Campbell, his work is a perfect example of that. He's coming up with these theories. He doesn't have meta theory, but this integrative impulse is implicit in his work. And then there's explicit meta theory self, but then often that integration has more of a personal focus. I want to integrate in all these perspectives so I can work on myself and have the best worldview and be skillful as an individual. And then the turquoise and higher is more of a collective integration, collective kind of meta theory, where it's you can tell what these projects are because they want to create new systems for the whole spiral. New projects, new systems, new governances, new, what we were talking about earlier, this idea of having new government, having new religion, have a new education system. These are new things that are supposed to be for everyone all the way down. And before that, at the more personal integration stages, that's where you get the more translation kind of approach. And often they're more undercover too. It's they sort of flex flow and adapt to whoever they're with to kind of engage with them where they're at and to translate with them and help them to become more healthy or better from where they're at. Of course, both are important. As they say, as we grow, we transcend and include. So it's not just like you're at these kind of rigid stages as you move. The idea is that there are lessons and values and vices at every stage, and there's things that we need to learn and bring online on every stage. And then there's also potentially unhealthy things that we need to get over or process at every stage. So earlier, when I was talking about these more fundamental or universal skills, like I was saying about focus and willpower and self-sacrifice, you got to get that. You got to get that at Blue. If you don't get it at Blue, if you try to keep going in your development, it's going to stifle you. It's interesting. Different people grow up in different kind of homes with different kind of parents, and it can really sort of change the dynamic of one's personal development. Let's say if you're raised by atheist parents or Christian parents or New Age parents, it's going to be a very different dynamic for you in your own personal development. If you're raised by New Age parents, or often they kind of have a hands-off, you be free, express yourself, kind of the wild child, a kind of approach to parenting. And actually, kids need structure. Kids need guidance. One of the best markers of success in life later is the ability to have self-control. Psychologists do that test where they put a marshmallow in front of a kid, and they're like, okay, don't eat the marshmallow until I get back. If you don't eat the marshmallow, when I get back, I'll give you 2 marshmallows or something like that, right? The longer the kid waits, they never come back. The longer the kid waits to eat the marshmallow, that is a huge predictor in their success in life. So if you don't have this impulse control given to you at a young age, if it's not taught to you, it becomes a big problem for you later in life. So even though, technically these hippie parents might be more highly evolved up the spiral, a lot of the first tier stages have kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to life, as opposed to taking into account what's appropriate at what stage. The problem with the more modern atheistic parents is a lot of times they don't care enough. They don't have enough emotions online. They kind of will often have this idea of let him cry it out, whereas the hippie parents can be way more nurturing and maybe overdo it, So it might actually even be best, at least at early stages of development, to have more traditional religious parents who can kind of, but the problem with that is that they might do a good job of teaching you through those early stages of development. But then as you get older into your teen years, now you're going to have to grapple with having to outgrow your parents. What do I do about that? It's going to be hard to actually leave this cult that they're in and potentially have to grapple with things, with them maybe even disowning you or you having to disown them, So there's problems with having parents at each one of these stages, and it can potentially help and harm your development. Just as a few examples, but I've done a type of training that is called spiral wizard training or cognitive kung fu, developmental chess, where one of the first things that we do is we go through all the different stages and we talk about what are all the values at each one of those stages. And we talk about, are you really in touch with the values at these stages? Maybe to just kind of run through it quickly, there's a bunch of survival skills that we need to be in touch with. Maybe at purple, you could say there's imagination and creativity that comes online. At red, there's this sort of standing up for yourself, having courage that comes online. At blue is that kind of self-sacrifice and the opening of the heart and the willingness to live for a higher purpose. At orange, there's an achiever thing that's heavy online in Western culture that a lot of people are in touch with, but there's also a rational element that a lot of people don't get. So a lot of people need to go back and learn about rationality, learn about science and the Socratic method and all this kind of stuff. But also that kind of strive and I'm going to achieve. That's the good stuff from orange. The good stuff from green is understanding and all-embracing care, a willingness to be sympathetic to all different worldviews. That's where you get some of this, like, don't judge, right? Well, the way to get in touch with the value of all worldviews is to start by kind of bracketing your judgment. And like, but then after you've done that, you kind of realize that if you're really going to love, you're going to have to use discriminating wisdom to figure out what's healthy and what's not healthy, and what's actually value and what's vice, and what's virtue and what's vice. And so that's where some of this desire to create like an integration comes online. And yeah, and then we continue further with these more like and a desire for skillful integration, and that's where some of these epistemic humility and these other kind of like skillfulness as a virtue come online. And then probably at the top point is something like fully just living for a higher purpose, like really wringing out your personal bias and checking yourself and owning your ego, and like being like, okay, these are the healthy parts of my ego that I will allow myself, and I will not allow myself to become a cult leader. Like I would say this is one of the problems with Wilber is, he thinks of himself as the Einstein of consciousness, and he kind of shuts off anyone's ability to grow beyond him. He will fight against you. The new king can become a tyrant if he's not willing to be humble and sacrifice himself and be open to the new information that's coming. This is another one of the important lessons, that we need to have a community where we can work on it together. Like, I don't see myself as the leader. I see myself as a leader, and I take on that role. But I want to invite other people to also come up to my level and to be a leader too, and to contribute and refine the map further. So yeah, that's one of the first things that we do in the Spiral Wizard training. The next kind of thing that we do is I show them how, if you push deep enough into every stage, you will inevitably find yourself in the next stage. And then we practice arguing through the stages in good faith, where like, okay, I'm blue, move me to orange, and then you kind of learn like, what are the fulcrums that you can push on to push someone through blue to orange, or through orange to green, through green. Then you kind of learn in yourself how to clean up a lot of this kind of stuff and how to engage skillfully with other people.
Really cool. I really hear your passion and knowledge coming through with your description of this stuff. It's like really there for you. Yeah, really, really cool to have this transmission. And this sounds like it's something that you're offering, like the Spiral Wizard training. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Hit me up.
Is that something that you run kind of semi-regularly? Or?
I haven't done it in a while. I've mostly done it with individuals one-on-one. I potentially in the future will offer it more as like a course. Like I said, I'm having, like, in launching this new meta theory, I'm kind of having to start over. So like one of the ways that I plan on kind of cleaning up the community is that, like, I want to like offer courses that have accreditations or certificates of completion. Right. So it's like, if you go through the course and you learn all the things, well, now you're qualified to teach this information. And once you go through, the initial training, the basic training, and the advanced training, then you're qualified to criticize and refine the map further. And we really need this, because a lot of people come into the community, they don't know the theory, and they want to be a leader or a teacher, and it's not healthy or good. And also we need this kind of way to recognize who has done the work to know what they're talking about, to be able to have that community of the adequate where we can refine together. I'm not going to be the final boss of this thing. I want collaborators. You know what I mean? Like I don't have all the answers. Like, a lot of this stuff is, a lot of these higher level techniques and methodologies that I'm talking about in terms of, knowing how to make the cake, that's going to that's stuff that we learn together through practice and sharing our skills and figuring out what techniques work for us. Not everybody can know everything. Not everybody is an expert at everything. That's why we need each other. That's why we have to have community. That's why we have to be able to share and refine together. But yeah, I do want to offer these courses, and I don't want money to be a barrier. That's another problem with this whole, with the Integral project, is they started marketing to green to try to make more money. And then what did they end up doing? They ended up selling it to green. They ended up saying things like, everybody's right, which kind of appeals to that green idea of like creating that kind of flatland. And they heard everybody's right, but it's equally true to say everybody's wrong. None of the views are correct. None of them. They're all partial and reductionist and limited. And whatever first tier worldview that you have, you need to deconstruct and reintegrate because this is too limited. And I'm not doing this for money. Like there needs to be money involved because we got to be able to make progress and do things in the world. But like, this is not a monetary project. It's more like a religion. It's more like a religious kind of project where I want the things to be available. That's important to me. So like these courses, I got to work on making them. That's going to be a lot of work to get all that ready. You know, that's going to take me a while to explain and unpack every single one of these elements and all the nuanced distinctions and all the things. It's going to take me a minute. That's just part one. Part two is going to be, how do you apply it to all these different human disciplines and like, how do you see it working in life practice, in religion, in governance, you know, in all these different ways, right? So that's going to take a while, but spiral wizard training could definitely also be a thing. And I'm going to make all of this stuff available for free on YouTube. So you can go through the course with people and you can pay for it and you'll have a better experience because we'll be learning it together and you'll have peers and stuff like that. But you can also you can just learn it in your own time on YouTube. And then I'll offer like a test on the cheap. You know what I mean? And then you can take the test and pass the test and then still get your certificate or whatever. You know what I mean? So this is my plan for how to fix it.
That's awesome. Yeah. I really appreciate those kind of donation models. And, you know, as if we're trying to be anti-capitalist, then kind of hypocritical to not sort of at least offer something like that, right? Like I've always in my workshops and facilitation, I've offered by donation or kind of sliding scale things because I think it's, we're not doing it for money. We're doing it for making the world a better place. And, you know, we all have to survive, so money has to be involved in some form, ideally. But yeah, really good on you, and that's really cool. Yeah. Sounds awesome.
I mean, I do a similar thing with my work. Like I publish it all online for free and make it all available. And then I just have like a Patreon. So it's sort of the idea being, you know, if you benefit from my work, if you appreciate the stuff I do, you know, then that's up to you. You can choose to sort of contribute to, you know, me supporting myself. But my goal though is to make the information available to people so people can benefit from it rather than sort of saying, well, I've done the work, now you gotta cough up. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I definitely think that you can hold more with your hands open than with your hands closed.
I love that. Yeah. That's a really great phrase.
That being said, support me on Patreon. Support this podcast on Patreon. If you value this stuff, please support us because, as you know, there's a small community for this stuff.
Yeah, something else that you shared about the spiral wizard training and about the capacity to communicate with the different stages and kind of help them move through the stage and to realize the stage above. That's been a passion of mine for a long time, and my attempt to create at first a video game where the stages are represented and the player themselves is sort of pushed in those ways, then realizing that, you know, that's such an ambitious project to do all by myself. I'm writing a novel instead, and at least I can give a demonstration of a character with particular developmental inclinations being inspired and moved through the stages. I think it's your creative projects like that to give examples is super helpful. And hopefully, you know, your community attracts some great creative talent and get some really cool projects on the go, like teaching this stuff.
The art is super important. As like a person who's been involved in filmmaking and stuff, the idea of show, don't tell. It's like humans are narrative driven creatures. You know, there's the amount of people who are really interested in theory is very small. So I definitely think that we got to figure out ways to tell compelling stories and to show people. I especially think about that in terms of like trying to make people understand the kind of revolutionary movement that we want to do and the kind of world that we would like to move into. I think one of the biggest problems with ever trying to explain any of that is that people will always think about whatever kind of suggestions you're going to make about how things would be in a different kind of society in terms of the current society and capitalism. Or like, why would anybody do that if you're not going to pay them or, something like this? And you kind of have to, you could tell them, but I think if you made like a movie or something like that, that like immersed people in the world and they saw why and how it works, that's way more powerful than,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that especially artistic media compels people to suspend their disbelief in a way that, they just, a lot, like people who are interested in theory often have a talent for suspending disbelief in order to entertain new ideas. But the average person, there's a sense of, well, how the status quo is kind of here and it's kind of working, and there's a sense of like, you got to have a pretty good reason to want to change things. Whereas if you can get someone to engage with a movie or a story or a piece of art, piece of music, and that kind of thing, inherently, it's like a switch goes off inside us and we just put all the normal things of the world aside in order to engage with that story. And if it really sucks us in and it has a real vision for how the world could be, that often overrides a lot of those sort of, but why sort of, that kind of, what would you call it, inertia of the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's
There's
work we got to do.
There's something really beautiful as well about acknowledging, the humans as mythic beings and storytellers. And there's a tendency, I think, in talking about, rationality, transrationality, and movements that kind of go beyond, say, scientific materialism or whatever, that we're going to lose or emphasizes some kind of rational truth that, we're going to lose this mythic quality, or we're going to lose this, something that is experiential that I can only imagine and be in, as opposed to talk about that feels much more like a myth than it does a rational explanation. And that in, building a framework and a model that uses more rationality and more science, that the risk, I think, in people's minds is that we're going to lose touch with that place, and we're not going to do a good job of meeting people in that mythic space. And I know that we're talking about art and we're talking about creativity and different ways of expressing this stuff, but I kind of feel like the map itself needs to be taught in those same ways. To teach people about the map is a kind of psychoactive in itself. So to have the map expressed in a creative, mythic way is a kind of another thing as well. Like, it's not just, I'm curious about your thoughts about that, David.
Yeah. Well, I've always tried to kind of avoid the academic talking head kind of style. I've always wanted to try to present and produce the stuff as if it's like fun and interesting and cool and playful, sometimes silly, sometimes musical. And I really want to maintain that. It can be difficult because if you go too much in that direction, sometimes people will, the more rational people will take you less seriously. But, I'm really more interested in trying to make the stuff more accessible. And I definitely think that, stories really matter. The framing really matters. Aesthetics really matter. And, a lot of times people are convinced purely based on aesthetics. That's how a lot of cults get people, is they have the right look. They have the right aesthetics, and it feels right to people, And, what I'm talking about in terms of like being a skillful, optimistic, creative force in the world, a type of method actor, that's the kind of metaphor that I like to use, and this is what I learned from Joseph Campbell too, is that like life is a poem. Like, we play out archetypes. We play these different roles. We live in a story. We tell a story about ourselves. We tell a story about the world. And part of what we're doing when we're trying to create these space is to tell a story and get other people to believe in it, Like, the way that I'm going to get people to be non-reductionist is that I'm going to tell a story that it exists and that it's a thing, and give people a way to play. It's a game that we play together, and it becomes real because people believe in it. And that's the same thing in relationships, like, what does it mean to be a good father? Well, you got to tell the story that you're a good father. You got to play the part of a good father. You might not always feel like a good father. You might not always feel like you want to be a good father, but to really do it right is to play along and to play that part and to act it out. Like the more we see ourselves as living the myth, as being in the myth, as being the archetypes that we want to be, that's what it is to live in your higher self, or live in your highest self. That's an idea. This idea that we can create this new world together, that sort of myth that we want to tell. And myth doesn't mean something that's not true. It's a story, that kind of myth that we want to tell about the kind of world that we want to live in together. That's something that we need to believe in to make it come true. It's something that obviously we have to ground in reality. The best poetry rings true. If it doesn't ring true, it's just nonsense. It's bullshit. So, it's also some of the difficulty that we have, because basically not only do we have to compete in the marketplace, we also have to compete in the marketplace of ideas. And it's difficult because the stories that rational people who, are really awake to our real situation want to tell don't always feel good to people. Like it takes real courage to have a good epistemology, to start from nothing and build from the ground up, to throw all your assumptions and everything you think that you've known out the window and build from nothing. It takes huge courage. And sometimes the people who are able to do this are people who haven't necessarily done it because they wanted to do it. They did it because they had to do it. They did it because it was very clear that they were caught up in some bullshit that was toxic. And so they needed to find the truth. And they didn't want to get caught back up in some other cult or some other bullshit that was going to be more toxic. Only the truth would be satisfying. We need to honor the truth, but we also need to tell a good story. We need to find a way to find the good things about the truth and emphasize them. Somebody dies. Well, the harsh reality is they're gone. They're gone. They're not coming back. We're never going to see them again. And they're not going to, heaven or hell, or like we don't get the feeling of, we don't get to have the feeling of like, oh, well, they're in bliss now, or they're getting punished for what they did that's bad. No, they live on in us. They live on in the world, in the impact that they had. And this is how we also need to really take our life seriously. We really need to honor our own responsibility to the impact that we make in the world, to the ripples that we make in time with our actions. And so while it hurts to hear that they're never coming back, it hurts to know that they're gone. We can know that they still live with us. They still live within us, that they're a part of us, and that's never going away. The impact that they never made is going away. And it helps us to know about our impact and how we need to be responsible and how we need to take our life super fucking seriously, because we are given this time. We have this time. What are we going to do with it? Are we just going to sit around and pretend like it's not going to end? Are we going to sit around and pretend like it doesn't matter because we'll really live after we're dead? No, this is it. This is it. This isn't an audition or like a trial run. This is it. Take your life super fucking seriously. Grab it and live it and do your best and make the biggest, best impact you can, because you are only here once. There's only one you. So that's the kind of potential story that we can tell around something that's hard like death, that hopefully, even though it's the hard truth, there's something beautiful and important to get from there. And bypassing the pain, bypassing the responsibility is not good. That's not healthy, and it's not fulfilling, and it's really not what people who really want truth are going to be cool. But we can't just tell the negative side. We also got to talk about the valuable lessons that come with these things.
I love your fire, man. And, a lot of the stuff you've said in the last sort of 10 minutes has really been resonating with me. So I just want to say thank you. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah, very well said. It kind of gives me pause for thought about the way that I communicate on social media. Like, I'm a staunch anti-capitalist, and most of my social media posts are just like reposts of Peter Joseph stuff or different anti-capitalist memes and things like that. But Peter Joseph hasn't released a documentary for a while, and most of his posts are critiques, and I haven't really posted anything hopeful. And I was originally super inspired by the Zeitgeist movement specifically because I had this beautiful, hopeful vision. No matter how unrealistic it might be to get there, I feel like it's at least something that I can, hope for and strive towards. But yeah, I think that having that hopeful narrative and the kind of flip side of is something that I want to be more cautious about when doing my own writing about the horrors of our times and the critiques of the different systems that we're a part of.
Yeah, I struggle with that.
Yeah,
too.
thanks for that.
Sometimes, it's hard not to feel angry, especially with how so many people are just bypassing their life and their responsibility, and they don't care. They're not trying. You know what I mean?
Almost like they're already dead. They've already started to die.
It would be very easy to want to post something like, "You're all stupid. What are you?" You could, but maybe a better post would be something like, encouraging them, you don't understand how much potential you have. Please grab your life and live it. Something like that. This is the kind of inner struggle that I have, because I get, as a very passionate person, I am very angry a lot of the times about how people aren't trying enough and people don't care enough. But yeah, I want to, and I do make angry posts sometimes, but I would much rather post something about how we're better than this. We can do better than this. Yeah.
Just to take us in a bit of a circle, I really think that stories are a way of inspiring people, because that statement, we're better than this, that can come across as a judgment, but like you were saying, showing, not telling, there's something in a really good story that ignites that fire in other people and helps them to feel like, hey, the moment is now and I need to do something. I need to change how I'm living. It could be so much more than this.
Yeah. And it takes sometimes bad things to happen and negative things for people to wake up, for example, if we actually did have a revolutionary movement going right now that was a viable option for people to participate in, you could point to something like what's happening in Gaza, what Israel is doing, and what's happening in Lebanon, and the way that America continues to support it, even though the world is screaming. People are protesting all over the planet. People are setting themselves on fire in front of, Jewish embassies. People are, boycotting all over the planet, and our two candidates, for president right now don't care. They're going to both support Israel. It doesn't matter. And the powerlessness that a lot of people are feeling, even after we've done so much. We've taken them to the international courts, the International Court of Justice. There's a warrant out for Netanyahu's arrest. They're committing war crimes and have been for so long. Yeah, it's crazy, because I never thought that humanity would ever stand for a genocide again. I thought we were past this, and we're not. We're still deep in it. And I think if there was an alternative, this could be an event in time that could get a lot of people wanting to give up on these old systems and potentially plug them into something new and revolutionary. The world is desperate for it.
Yeah, there's some set, and this might be a conversation for another time, around kind of propaganda and the vices of capitalism, and the emphasis on entertainment and laziness as essentially kind of the indulgence of everything that capitalism gives us. But yeah, maybe not the right time for that. Could go into another conversation.
Free Palestine.
Yeah.
What you said about the world being desperate for it, that really rang true for me. There's definitely the time is now.
Yeah, the time has been now for some years,
for a while. Yeah,
but I definitely think once the option is there, people will take it.
I think one of the things that an integral or a meta theory, let's move it away from the integral map, a meta theory is good at is providing a common ground for people to do sense making from, and it's discerning in a way that is desperately needed right now, the emphasis on conspiracy that COVID kind of brought in, and the times of people having more time on their hands and misinformation, and there's a psyop about psyops and all this kind of stuff. And I think that it's required, right? Like a movement that doesn't have some sense-making tools embedded is probably going to fail, and a vision, and has to have all these. It almost makes me want to do an episode on like the requirements for revolution or something like that. Like
Yeah.
just to have a full-on discussion about breaking this stuff down and like what is needed and how do we do it well? And I have a friend who's a Marxist and he's part of the socialist alternative here in Melbourne. And I'm always having these conversations with him like, hey, there's been all these different revolutions throughout history. And obviously our time is so vastly different from those times. We can't just look at those times and be like, let's just do what they did. There's so many more different forces and factors pushing against us these days. And kind of globally connected world, and there's infinite information and zero truth, and it just feels like such an overwhelming task. So it'll be really interesting to dive into those ways with you at some point, David.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I definitely think that a lot of people talk about revolution, but do they have a plan for how they're going to run shit better on the other side?
Yeah.
You really need
That's
both.
That's part of what I, in terms of a potential future conversation around the requirements for revolution. I broke, on my little notes page, I broke it down into, what needs to be the case for a revolution to happen, and what do we need to have ready to go in terms of a replacement, in terms of something new. Because I think that's part of the difficulty and the danger of a revolution is, unless you've got a good plan and it's kind of like really in the pipeline and you've got people ready to put it into place, there's a real danger of that power vacuum creating something worse, basically.
Sure. Yeah, break down instead of break through. Yeah, that's very dangerous. And also, there have been successful revolutions in the past, like China's revolution, and a lot of people died in the wake of the revolution just from a lack of organization being in place.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what you really need is a marketplace revolution over time that goes through stages, some kind of a game B revolution that works within the current system but eats it from the inside and takes over slowly, because you really have to have things in place and you really have to take your time to be able to transition. Otherwise, lots of people are gonna, like you said, die in the wake, or it leads to some kind of breakdown, which is also why I'm saying, like, as much as I want to talk about the revolutionary stuff, we really have to make sure we lay the groundwork with the more upper quadrant work of the theory and the life practice. And even this idea of like, hey, we're going to refine the map together, right? The process that we use to refine the map together is very similar to the kind of decision-making kind of processes that you're going to need later to be able to decide things in a community. You know what I mean? If it doesn't work on a small scale, if it doesn't work in the context of a business or a small group, it's not going to work at scale. And at scale, you have all these different factors too. Like, you got to be able to have like the local, this is why we have like local, state, and federal, laws and ways of dealing with those things. Like, and then imagine like expanding that to the global scale and coordinating all of that with like managing resources. A huge, huge undertaking. And it's going to take a lot of buildup and a lot of practice and a lot of refinement to get there. And anything less than a full-on global revolution is not good enough.
Yeah. I think I really like your idea of, something step by step where the system kind of gets transformed from the inside out. But it also occurs to me that, like, it seems like it would have to be like something in the middle, really, because there's a certain point at which that starts happening where the old system becomes aware of the threat and then starts to fight back and sort of defend itself against that, suppress that new way of thinking and being and living in order to kind of preserve that status quo, and that can get pretty ugly as well.
Yeah, well, depending on how you set it up and how you do it, they won't be able to fight against it. Like, for example, if we set it up right and it's like a system that's going, it's not like there's a leader that you can kill. It's an idea that's time has come with a particular methodology and people participate in it wherever they're at. And if it's a marketplace revolution, it's using capitalism and competing in the market just like any other corporation. They of course can use the same kind of, money and power and things to try to manipulate the market in their favor, but we can too. If we get big enough, and we can get to the point where we can put pressure on them. And the thing is, if you set up a good enough alternative and you have enough ability to integrate in more people, it is very easy to pull the bottom out from under the pyramid. Because if you can say to people, hey, are you tired of like working week to week and wondering if you're going to be able to make it? Do you want your kids to go to school in a system that optimizes their development? Do you want, like free education and the ability and free healthcare and like a guaranteed place to live and a system that invests in you so you can reach your own highest potential because it believes that it will bring the most profit to the system for you to be living your best life? People are going to be like, yeah, I think I'd prefer that. And then how are the people at the top of the pyramid going to be able to continue to even be at the top of the pyramid once you take the bottom out from underneath them? And of course, we can work within the current systems too. Like we could have, the revolutionary Game B movement and try to get a candidate elected. And then hopefully when they get into place, you can shake hands and dissolve peacefully from the inside, like get them to adopt inside with us. So I think by the time the people figure out what's happening, it's already too late.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool vision. I'd definitely love to do another discussion with you if you're up for it, about it. Actually, there's a couple of different directions that I'm curious, because on this channel we're interested in ontology, and I'm curious about your journey with epistemology and kind of coming to your ground of being and what different frameworks you have in your new systems as a possible side topic, and this topic of revolution, which I think probably fits our telos stream of purpose and vision.
Thanks.
So yeah, I'd love to have you back. Really big pleasure to have you on and hear your passion and knowledge coming through. And I'm just feeling like it's a good time to end our chat. Elated and good energy and keen for more. So hopefully the audience will feel some of that too.
Definitely, but I would love to do it again soon, because I definitely think there's a lot more threads to track down and see where they lead us. And yeah,
thanks guys. It's been a huge privilege and an honor to be able to sit with you and talk about these really important topics and concepts. And yeah, I'm guessing my link tree will be in the description when this comes out, and you guys can plug in and check out my videos on non-reductionism. And if you want coaching or private tutoring or anything like that, you can hit me up.
Awesome.
Amazing. All right, thanks guys. I'll see you again soon.
Yeah.
Peace, fellas.